Sebastian didn't say it this time, because in my story, there is no Sebastian. There's my brother, Miles. And his voice, buoyed by smug laughter, ricocheted off the mahogany paneling of Calder and Pritchard, attorneys at law, the way summer thunder ricochets around the Blue Ridge. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil, old paper, and the dark roast Mr. Calder insisted on brewing himself. Outside, Asheville's afternoon heat rose off Biltmore Avenue in silver ripples. A slow rain had just passed, leaving the pavement glossy as black glass and the crepe myrtles dripping pink confetti on the sidewalk. My name is Camille Rowan. I'm 33, and for the last decade, I've been the spine and steady heartbeat of Rowan Timber Stone. The construction company my father started with one dented pickup and a toolbox that never closed all the way. While Miles hopscotched across countries, finding himself and finding someone else's credit card to pay for it, I learned to read soil reports and pro formas in the same morning, to smell when concrete was wrong before anyone checked the slump, to coax an HVAC subcontractor to stay on a job through a holiday weekend with hot biscuits and a promise I'd keep. That work never impressed anyone in my family as much as Miles's tan. I mean, it's fitting, my Aunt Lorraine tittered, dabbing dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief that had never met an actual tear. Kim always loved playing house with those porcelain things, and Miles understands the business. I tightened my fingers in my lap until my knuckles went the color of mountain fog. Across from me, Miles leaned back in his slate suit like he'd already grown into a CEO someone else would have to teach him how to be. My stepmother, Margot, kept smoothing the silk at her hips, sending up a whisper of bergamot and starch. Mr. Calder cleared his throat. The sound was small, but precise, like a pen tapping crystal. The ceiling fan hummed overhead. Far off, a motorcycle snarled down the wet street. I caught the faint click of the old clock on the bookcase and the watery plink of rain easing from the gutter outside. Actually, Mr. Calder said, each syllable slicing cleanly through their laughter, the company was never in his name. The room stalled. You could hear the air conditioner take a breath. Miles's smile fractured. I sat straighter. The smell of coffee seemed to warm. Excuse me? Miles's laugh thinned into something papery. Whose name, then? Mr. Calder slid a thick navy file to the center of the table paper, heavy under paint blue tabs, and adjusted his readers. Per the amended operating agreement for Rowan Timber Stone, LLC, dated October 3rd, 4 years ago, controlling membership interests were transferred to M's, Camille Rowan. Your father retained a minority interest as advisor. Management and day-to-day control have been Miss Rowan's since then, at your father's written directive. Silence deepened. Outside, a cicada droned one long electric string, then stopped. My father, Samuel Rowan, had told me a version of the truth in a hospital room that smelled like chlorhexidine and oranges. I'd sat beside him counting the metronome beep of his monitor, while the Blue Ridge sunset laid soft apricot light across his worn hands. If anything happens, he'd whispered, tugging at my sleeve like a child with a secret, the dolls aren't just pretty. He'd smiled, a strange, proud, guilty smile, eyes drifting toward the cracked leather briefcase parked beneath the window. You'll know. I thought he meant sentiment. I hadn't realized he meant leverage. This is absurd, Miles said now, color climbing his collar. I'm the son who... The will we're reading today, Mr. Calder interrupted gently, addresses your father's personal estate residence, vehicles, personal investments, and family heirlooms. The business transfer was completed and recorded separately. Quietly, he added, glancing at me with that soft lawyerly humor. Per your father's instructions? Margot let out a brittle little laugh. So Camille gets the dolls, and my son gets the house. Let's work in order, Mr. Calder said, opening the next packet. Papa rasped. The fan ticked. Somewhere in the building, a drawer slid shut. The smell of rain returned as a draft slipped under the office door. Primary residence. To Miles Rowan with associated mortgage balance, Mr. Calder read. Miles's face rearranged itself. Personal investments. To Miles Rowan, net of any outstanding margin obligations. Another rearrangement. Vintage F-150. To Miles. At least a truck. He'd always liked the way it looked in Dad's old photos. Rowan Family Archive. To Camille. Aunt Lorraine arched a penciled brow. And the dolls? Mr. Calder steepled his fingers, the corners of his eyes crinkling as if he'd been waiting, not unkindly, for someone to ask. He set a separate, narrow binder on the table. The cover, cornflower blue, caught the light like a lake at noon. The porcelain doll collection. Amassed by your great-grandmother, her daughter, and so forth. 43 pieces, including 3 rare Bru Jen bisque heads and 2 intact Jumeau bébé. With original mohair wigs is bequeathed to M's. Rowan, together with Infly, Darrell, appraisals and provenance. Miles snorted. Congratulations, Cam. Enjoy your creepy room. Mr. Calder didn't look away from me as he turned a page. Latest formal appraisal, 9 months ago. $486,000. Conservative estimate. The collection is insured at $520,000. Ito. The electric cicada came back, and then all at once every sound was too loud. The gutter drip, the clock tick, Aunt Lorraine's whispered, "My word," the soft, wet sound of Marco's mouth opening and closing like a fish. Miles's laugh broke. $500,000 for toys. They're not toys, I said quietly. They're assets. Noi. My voice surprised even me. It carried the riverbed gravel of men I'd worked alongside and the clean edge my father used when a concrete pour started to go wrong. The room tilted around that word until it felt like the floor found me. Mr. Calder's pen snagged a paperclip, small and bright as a fishhook. Your father, he said, was meticulous. He did not lose things. He placed them. The words slid through me like a key into a lock. If you'd asked the Rowan boss, who was destined to lead the company, they'd have said, Miles. Because he looked like a brochure. Tall, sun-streaked, a grin so easy it made waiters upsize his entree for free. If you'd asked the build sites, they'd have said, me, because they'd seen me at dawn in steel-toe boots and at midnight in a pencil skirt, and both times with a clipboard that had already solved tomorrow. I learned what mattered at places where the air smelled like pine resin and diesel, where nail guns chuffed like small, impatient beasts, where afternoon thunderclouds rolled over the mountains like bruised silk, and men stopped cussing mid-sentence to watch lightning walk its blue legs down a ridge. I learned a house breathes, a slab remembers, a wall tells you if it wants to be moved. Miles learned how to hashtag Santorini. 5 summers ago, while he was sending us filtered sunsets from Mykonos, I was standing in a hard hat at a planning commission meeting, palm sweating against a paper cup of burnt coffee. Our biggest project to date. Hickory Hollow, 120 craftsman-style homes outside Hendersonville, was about to die in a tangle of permits and perimeter wetlands. I learned the names of every voting member's grandchildren and the local salamander species within a week. I wore out a pair of flats and half my patience. The project lived. 2 weeks later, in Dad's office that smelled like cedar and graphite, Mr. Calder spread papers across a table whose dents told stories. The summer Dad dropped a wrench. The winter I carved my initials small on the underside of the lip where I thought he'd never see. We can protect the business, Mr. Calder said then, tapping a clause with a neat square nail. We can stabilize the succession. Dad rubbed his temple. The afternoon light made his freckles look like constellation maps. He glanced at me, then down at the dollhouse on the bottom shelf, the one My great-grandmother built from orange crates during the war. Tiny windows cut with a razor blade and patience. "You know their names," he'd murmured, not looking at me. "You were the only one who remembered to dust. And the dolls, Cam. It's not just lace. It's paperwork." He signed. He slid the pen to me. I signed. We didn't tell anyone. Sometimes the quietest moves are the strongest. Back in Mr. Calder's office, paper shifted like a low surf. Rain tack-tacked from the last leafy fringes of the crepe myrtles outside. I could smell the wet penny metallic tang of a budding storm. "This is a mistake," Miles said, but he'd lost the buoyancy. All that remained was a wobble. "Camille doesn't know anything about running a business. She's just what? The bookkeeper?" A laugh tried to crawl up my throat. I pressed it down like you press an air bubble under wallpaper. "I'm the Paxson managing member, Saoy, who kept this company solvent through a lumber spike and a pandemic," I said evenly. "I'm the one who negotiated the supply contract with Pisgah Millworks when everyone else's lead times doubled. I'm the one bankers return calls to." "Enough," Margot snapped, but too late, because even Aunt Lorraine's face had shifted from indulgent to listening. Mr. Calder's voice softened. "Shall I summarize the rest?" I nodded. "Business assets, contracts, equipment, and intellectual property transferred to Miss Rowan 4 years ago. Miss Rowan assumed all debt obligations and has serviced them on schedule. The company's valuation has increased by 42% during that period." He glanced up. "Her father left notes in the file praising Camille Spiss' good bone sense. If I may quote, Lorraine's handkerchief finally found use. She pressed it to her lips. Miles looked at the table as if seeking a trapdoor. Mr. Calder slid the slim blue binder, the one with insurance writers and appraisals, toward me. I let my palm rest on it for a heartbeat, feeling the cool pebbled cover. Somewhere in that binder was an inventory page with names I'd known since childhood. Brujane, Jumeau, Somewhere there was a copy of my great-grandmother, Estelle's tidy script. Provenance notes, dates, auctions hand-scrolled in fountain pen blue. "What happens now?" Miles asked, but it came out small, and the room seemed too big for it. "Now," I said, rising, "I go to work." I stood, the chair legs whispering across the rug. Mr. Calder stood too, and old-fashioned as cut crystal. He bowed his head an inch. "Your father loved you," he said softly. "Both of you. But he trusted one of you to keep promises." The air outside was heavy and sweet as I stepped into it. Wet heat curled around my ankles like a cat. The mountains to the south were layered in 4 blue zinc, slate, fog, silk with thunderheads stacking white on white beyond. On a side street, a bakery's exhaust laid a ribbon of sourdough and cinnamon, and a bus brake squealed like a gull. By the time I pulled into our yard behind the office, a low cedar-sided building with a tin roof that sang in the rain, my phone had already erupted with a dozen texts I didn't open. The yard smelled like cut pressure, treated diesel and rain-cooled dust. Men in neon shirts rolled extension cords. Someone laughed, the sound carried thin by humidity. A compressor coughed, then caught. It carried off as the window unit rattled its cool blessing. Framed on the wall were photos of ribbon cuttings where my nail polish was chipped. On the shelves were adamantine and Klein volumes Dad had sworn by, and I had learned to underline in pencil, not pen. I set the binder down and reached for the drawer where I kept the good pen and the good whiskey both gifts from clients who had tried and failed to pay me in something besides money. I didn't drink. I took the pen. When the knock came, it was hesitant. My assistant, Lacey, poked her head in. "Your brother's here," she said softly. "Do you want to see him?" A part of me wanted to say no out of pure self-preservation. Another part remembered the way Miles once taught me to throw a spiral in the yard. The ball whistling through humid dusk, fireflies blinking like faint Morse code over the grass. "Send him in," I said. Miles had lost something in the last 2 hours. The easy weightlessness, maybe. His suit wore him. His shoulders were rounded, and as if sheltering a storm only he could feel. "Nice place," he said, which was something men say when they walk into a room where a woman's name is on the door and their own isn't. "We built it with our own crew," I said. "Took me 3 years to convince Dad to insulate properly. The tin roof makes him nostalgic when it's loud." He blinked. "Cam, I need a job." There are moments in life that feel like standing at the edge of a quarry lake you swam in as a kid. The surface is the same green glass. The dragonflies still stitch blue lightning just above it, but beneath, the shape has changed. Cavities have widened. Currents have moved. You know this water, but you don't. "We're not hiring," I said gently. "Not for the work you want." He flinched. "I can learn." I believed he could. I also knew learning under me would look like punishment to him, even if it wasn't meant as one. "There's a skills program at Haywood," I said. "Electrical. It carried good at it if you could stand not being congratulated for 6 months." His mouth twisted. "So that's it." "That's it," I said, and waited for the anger. It didn't come, only a shrug that landed hard. He left without slamming anything. Progress, maybe, or exhaustion. I closed the door and put my forehead against the cool glass for a minute. In the yard, a nail gun thudded in a steady rhythm. A mockingbird did its best impression of a reversing truck. The storm skirted us, the edges of rain teasing the tin without fully committing. 2 weeks later, Rowan Timber and Stone signed an expansion deal that would have made Dad proud. A small but mighty partnership with a green roof startup run by a woman who had built her first living wall out of shoe organizers and thrift store gutters. We took the first call, standing under an eave while rain hosed down the lot and lightning struck a mile off, the thunder arriving with a belly laugh 4 beats later. We shook hands in the shop, our palms still gritty with sawdust. On a Saturday morning, I drove up to my father's old house, the one now technically Miles's, though the mailbox still wore Dad's name like a smile he hadn't quite taken off. The rhododendrons were already blooming stupid and lush, and the air smelled like chamomile and wet earth. The porch boards sighed the way they always had. My key still slid into the lock. Inside, dust rode the light in visible motes. The grandfather clock ticked. The living room had not learned the trick of not being his. I went to the den. My grandmother's doll cabinets standing like narrow, guarded chapels along 2 walls, and turned the lights on. If you've never been alone with old porcelain, you should try it once. The silence isn't empty. It's textured. The faint starch of antique linen, the whiff of beeswax, the microscopic crackle in bisque that your fingers feel like a second sight. Faces, pale as moon milk, regarded me with their fixed curiosity. Under glass, a Prue sat with a silk sash the exact blue of a mountain ridge at dusk. A Jumeau, with spiral-threaded eyes, seemed to understand more than she should. On the bottom shelf lay the ledger. The one I used to trace when I was 7, because the columns looked like streets on a map. I sat cross-legged on the old rug and opened it. Provenance entries, careful and square, marched down the pages. Dates, sales, prices that began small and sensible in the 1940s and became astonishing. Tucked into the back in a manila pocket where my great-grandmother had written, "Keep Darrow," were insurance writers. Appraisals. A 1-page letter from Mr. Calder with a sentence that made my mouth go dry. As discussed with your father, collection may be pledged as collateral temporarily in emergency liquidity situations at trustee's discretion. He had never used them that way. He'd made sure I knew I could. I pressed my palms briefly together, not exactly praying, but something close to listening. The house creaked. A drip ticked into the sink from a faucet Miles had never learned to seal properly. "I'll keep them safe," I told the room, which meant everyone and no one. My father, the women who had touched these objects before me, the girl I had been who was relieved to find out the dolls weren't just pretty after all. When the Betis Portland Business Journal wrote about someone else's sibling drama, none of it mentioned the smell of lemon oil, the weight of rain, the taste of your own patience when you bite it in half. When our small local paper finally covered our expansion, they spelled my name right and everything. People in town congratulated me the way you congratulate someone for something you didn't realize they'd already done. I drove back to the office late that night. The yard had turned a deep navy blue. Fireflies blinked in the ditch like soft Morse code. The tin roof pinged as it shed the day's heat. Inside, the break room smelled like coffee and orange cleaner. Someone had left a note on the corkboard was, "Nice work at Hickory." Pinned under a receipt spike, the handwriting was blocky and familiar. I didn't take it down. On my desk, the slim blue binder waited. I ran my thumb across its edge until heat woke in the friction. My phone buzzed with a text from Lacey. "Your 8 a.m. wants to bring cinnamon rolls. Should I permit carbohydrates?" I typed, "Permit all carbs," and leaned back in my chair. Out in the yard, a train moaned down the valley. The night pressed its broad, warm palm against the windows. I thought about assets and heirlooms, about ownership and care. The difference between holding something for yourself and holding it so it doesn't fall. I thought about my father's last words about the dolls, how I'd misunderstood and not misunderstood at the same time. If you ask me now, I tell you the truth is this. The sweetest kind of revenge is not public. It's not loud. It's a ledger. Balanced, roof that doesn't leak in the first storm, a crew until paid on time, a doll, that keeps her secrets until you ask exactly right. It's a woman walking into a room where people used to call her a bookkeeper, setting down a blue binder and watching the air itself change shape around her name. On my way out, I turned off the lights, one by one. The yard sighed. The tin roof clicked. A last reluctant drop of rain let go somewhere out over the loading dock and made a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. I locked the door and stepped into the night that smelled like honeysuckle and wet sawdust. The mountains shouldered the stars, and above the quiet chorus of crickets, I could almost hear my father laugh. Low, pleased, tired-like, a man satisfied to finally see what he'd built fall into the hands of the person who'd been carrying it all along. It carried